Welcome to Today in Space. This is a segment where we get to talk to people who work in the industry, who are passionate about science, technology, engineering, math. And today we're lucky to have Jim Cantrell on. Jim, why don't you tell the folks a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get started into your STEM origin story and where the passion kicked off for what you're doing today.
Sure. Yeah, name's Jim Cantrell. I've been in the business about 35 years, but I really think of myself as a builder, a maker, and entrepreneur. So that's what fascinates me and excites me, is just building stuff.
I can relate a lot. I started, I think my building started with injection molding, working in a machine shop with tool makers, learned a really old craft. And then I've
Right.
got 3D printers in my basement. So I can definitely relate.
Yeah, good. Yeah, it's the pleasure of building. It's genetic, I think. As I look back on my ancestry, they were all carpenters or builders of ores of various sorts. You begin to sort of believe a little bit in maybe the genetic story over environment at some point. But yeah, I mean, the only thing I've really ever known I wanted to do in my life for sure was to race cars and build them, and everything else has just sort of been an extension of that in one way or another. Yeah. And ever since I was a little kid, it was tear things apart and
put it back together again.
Right. I had a very patient mother. She'd come home and find her massacred bathroom scale. Why are you doing this? Well, I wanted to find out how it worked, and I was curious. I could never get it back together. Invariably, the clips and the springs, and my dad, he was less tolerant of things like that. I grew up in a very blue collar family, and he was delivering uniforms, and he lived with this hard reality of life compared to, this esoteric sense of things I had, this curiosity. He didn't share that with me at all. And he'd get madder than hell. And, as I graduated later to building these little soapbox derby cars and stealing the wheels off his lawnmowers, that he didn't appreciate very much either.
So tell me more about what was like the first thing that you built that you can remember in the early years?
The first thing I really remember building was a fort, and sort of, I think most kids did that in one way or another in their living room with blankets and things like that. And their parents make them clean it up later. Well, I grew up on a chicken ranch down in Southern California. I know it's hard to believe there were such things, but we had goats, and we had pigs and cows and chickens and rabbits, and there was invariably a lot of wood and things, construction materials around, and so I would drag them and go get a hammer. So as I we get money for my birthday or whatever, I go spend it on nails and hammers, and that's the sort of thing that interested me. And my parents, again, were very tolerant, and eventually they'd tear it down because it was unsafe. But I graduated to making these wood go-karts, and that was probably the second thing I really remember. And that was a long line of experiments. And we lived on this hill that had a long driveway, and it was perfect for soapbox derby cars, And except get to the bottom, there's a street, and how are you going to stop and not get run over? So there were technological challenges too.
Oh, that's great. I makes me wonder how much of when anyone's in STEM is at those early years, right? I've talked to a few people now, and your story is very similar. And like the people who they start early. All right, very exciting news here on the podcast. We have our first official sponsor that is not our own 3D printing company here funding the podcast. And support for Today in Space is brought to you by Manscaped, who is the best in men's below-the-waist grooming and, honestly, men's grooming in general here. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. Manscaped recently launched the Ultimate Men's Hygiene Bundle, the Performance Package. Join over 4 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with this exclusive offer for you, 20% off and free worldwide shipping with code SPACE at manscaped.com. So again, that's 20% off and free worldwide shipping. That's with inflation and the way the economy is going and how expensive everything is in COVID time. You can get this shipped around the world for free and get 20% off in the time and when you need to get this stuff off. I mean, look, I just literally used the Manscaped Lawnmower 4.0, and you can hear it there. Has a nice LED light, so you can actually see where you're doing it, and it actually works great as a beard trimmer as well. This is grooming of all kind, guys. Here, so I was traveling this weekend, right, and I didn't have my Lawnmower 4.0 yet, and I went to some place. I ended up doing the embarrassing trip to the mall to find something that could trim up before I went to a wedding. And as I opened this cheap thing that really wasn't going to get the job done, it didn't even have a battery that came with it. All the stuff that comes in here comes with a charger, whether it's the Lawnmower 4.0 or the Weed Whacker for those nose hairs, which this is the best one I've used since I literally just did it. Usually it nicks and it pulls hair. I mean, look, I'm Greek, 100%. There's a lot of hair to deal with, right? So these are just the right tool, right? And the thing that I think really goes really underrated is they give you this Manscaped daily news newspaper. You get a whole bunch of them. And of course, if you're shaving down there, you can put it on the ground. But even just in general, right, guys? I think part of the reason why some of us don't groom is because it's so much to pick up and you're not ready for it. You don't have the right tools. Here we're talking about getting the right tools. We're talking about they think about all the different aspects of it, right? You literally put this paper down. You don't have to do much cleanup after you. You catch all the hair, and then all you do is gather it in the middle and dump it in to the trash. That's how easy cleanup makes it. And it's a really simple thing, but they got you covered at Manscaped. So use the code SPACE, get 20% off and free worldwide shipping on anything. There's even things like the Crop Reviver and the Crop Preserver. Lots of things for your male grooming needs available right now. Use the code SPACE at manscaped.com, and thank you, Manscaped, for sponsoring and supporting Today in Space podcast. Don't forget, 20% off and worldwide shipping. Use code SPACE. Be less of a Wookiee and more of a Han Solo. Get it right today, folks. Manscaped.com, code word SPACE. Did the business side of things, did that mix when you were younger? Is that something you found later?
Much later in life, yeah. Strangely so, my frustration with the Utah State University and their space dynamics lab that I worked at as a graduate student, and their lack of business sense sort of drove me to try and understand how business was really supposed to work. I just knew that one was broken, right?
Yeah.
As I look back on it years later, university environment really isn't a business environment at all. But I had this sense that it ought to be, and I was intent on fixing it. And then my first wife and I started a recycling company, curbside recycling company back in I guess it was 92, something like that. And that's when I really started learning about business and how you have to have cash flow, and how you have to have employees that actually do something, and all the sort of things that employees can do when you're not looking, and the equipment that they break, and how expensive equipment is, and on and on and on, and how to collect money from people. So gradually that became second nature. And what I discovered was being in business gave me freedom, and it gave me a freedom from what I considered the stupidity of certain people. And it seemed like there was, I know this seems very arrogant, but in my 20s, seemed like the world was run by people that just really didn't know what the hell was going on, at least in the segments that I was running into. So I could create my own future, my own destiny with this. And as I was learning how to make more and more money, gradually I got better and better at it. That sense of freedom just grew, and it allowed me to make bigger and bigger and greater things.
Definitely. And you can see that through your career. I can go through it here real quick for the folks, unless you want to give a quick recap.
No, I can give a quick cap.
Yeah, absolutely, please.
Yeah, so my career started off with a French space agency, and I got into that job because I'd had a internship at JPL, and I can come back to how we ended up there. That's a whole other story in and of itself. Involves university. and they were working with the French and Soviets back in the 80s. And you got to remember, okay, now at least right now, people get that the Russians are these bad people and all this stuff's going on in Ukraine. Well, Soviet Union was like amped that up 100 times, and we weren't supposed to be talking to the Soviets, but I was. I've never listened to anybody's advice or rules very well, so that went along very well. But we were cooperating with them informally on a Mars mission. The French and Soviets had a mission to Mars that was going to go on a Soviet rocket, and in the U.S. we had Challenger, which had blown up, and we weren't doing a damn thing. So it was a frustrating time for us. And so my first job then was over at the French Space Agency, and I was working on a Mars balloon mission, and I was in charge of what was called the Snake. And the Snake was a artificial payload that would be below a Mars balloon, and as the balloon would cool at night, it would come down to the surface, and the Snake would drag around with a subsurface radar in it. And so I was in charge of that. And then the Soviet Union came apart, and that wasn't a good outcome, because the people who were working on it ceased to get paid once the Soviet Union fell apart. And so the program kind of came apart. So I came back to the U.S. Within about 3 months. Somebody from one of the intelligence agencies discovered through my boss, Frank Red, that I spoke Russian and I knew about the Soviet aerospace industry. And so he approached me to help out on a program they had to stop brain drain. And, given that nobody was being paid, the whole business of nuclear weapons scientists and guys who build ICBMs was of great interest to the United States, because there's the Iranians and the North Koreans and a number of other third world countries were going to pay these guys very well to come lend their expertise to their programs. So we sort of parachuted into the former Soviet Union with this government money in our pockets to just do stuff, right? And it was at that time I was pretty fearless. I would say without fear, right? Not fearless, but without fear.
Right.
And that's more of a position of ignorance than it is a sort of a bravado. And trust me. So we
I
get
a little bit of that in college as well. So I can relate to that.
We all start out that way. But so we helped convert some ICBMs. That was part of what we did, and we did a joint missile defense program with the one group, and we built something that looked like a nuclear weapon and launched it and re-entered it, so we could study the bow shocks and so forth. And part of a group that brought back a nuclear reactor from the space nuclear reactor from the Soviet Union, and I think it's still in New Mexico because we couldn't re-export it. But so that all ended in '96 when I got arrested for espionage by the Russians and held under house arrest for about 2 months. And that was another learning experience of sorts, and I'd say a watershed moment in my life. So I still went back after that, but I got out of this particular program and was doing sales for Space Dynamics Lab in Utah. And then this is about the time when Elon Musk calls me out of the blue in 2001, and he had got my name from Bob Zubrin, who had tried to help extract me from France when I was trying to find a way back.
Wow.
So I'd read Bob's article. He was still at Lockheed Martin, but I'd read his article about going to Mars on a diet, as he called it.
Yeah.
It was in Aerospace America, as I recall. And so I just called him up, I say, hey, Bob, I love your article, blah, blah, blah. I'm working on this Mars program in France. And hey, do you have a job for me? So he arranged all these interviews, and of course they didn't want to hire me because I was a traitor of sorts. But so at any rate, Elon calls me because he got my name from Bob, and Elon had showed up at a Mars Society meeting in Palo Alto, and said, hey, he wanted to do something with his money that he'd made from PayPal. He'd just been fired from PayPal, by the way. Most people don't know that, but
I didn't know that.
So he calls me. It was July of 2001, and it was this famous phone call where he just rambled on about multiplanetary species, and I thought the guy lost his mind, and I really didn't know who he was. And we dealt with a lot of internet billionaires and millionaires back then. You know, the Gross brothers, for example, had
Mm-hmm.
started a lunar company, and they had Idea Lab down there in Pasadena, and would taken those guys over there at one point. And so it wasn't anything that unusual in that sense, but Elon was quite different in his sole focus on what he wanted to do. And so we worked on that mission and tried to get him changed. We changed it to a Mars mission. So then there was the famous story. We can come back to it if you want to, but you can read
I did
about
want
it.
to ask about that. It's
Okay.
a definitely
All
a
right.
legend.
We'll come back to that. Skip
Absolutely.
over it for a moment. So we couldn't buy rockets from the Russians, and that's when we decided to start SpaceX. So I was there for I was with Elon for about 18 months, something like that. So I bailed early, thinking that there's no way SpaceX could be successful based on the economics. My rationale was sound at the moment, but it wasn't based on any realization that Elon would become what he is, right? I probably would have
Yeah.
tried to hang on longer had
Sure.
I done it. It was difficult. It was very, very difficult for me to deal with. And
Yeah.
I talked about this freedom thing earlier.
Mm.
You know, so my flight gene was just going off with him, so I left
Mm.
and started my own company, Strat Space, and made a lot of money. I made a lot of money doing satellite work, a lot of classified stuff, space warfare,
Mm.
and consulting in general. And then we ended up with about 50 people at one point. And about 2010, I woke up one day and you know, I'd become more and more libertarian as I got older,
Mm.
and not believing the government was a solution to our problems. And I woke up and I just said, "What am I doing? You know, I'm making my living off of the government. I don't believe in it. I'm a hypocrite."
Mm.
And besides that, I knew, you know, what Snowden was about to announce. I didn't know he was going to announce it, but I knew about
Mm.
that stuff, and I just became a conscientious objector to that and the war. You know, my son's friends who were little kids, you know, that I watched grow up, you know, come back with arms missing from the
Mm.
war, and I felt materially affected by that. I really did. I felt sort of guilty, you know, for having been part of the machine and wanting it to, because I made money on it,
Sure.
and I just felt horribly guilty. So I walked away from it all, and I said,
Mm.
"I'm done. You know, I'm done with aerospace. I'm done with the military. I'm done." It wasn't still a patriot, but you know, I just didn't want anything to do with any of it. So I went into the
Yeah.
automotive industry
Mm.
and started a company called Vintage Exotics, and we did a lot of race cars, and I did a lot of racing. I had a professional racing career for a while, and that was great until the startups started showing up at my doorstep. So like
Okay.
SkyBox Imaging was one of them. These guys came
Mm.
out of the NRO, and I knew them from there, and we helped them get started. And they sold to Google for $500 million, and that became part of Planet now. If you're
Oh wow.
familiar,
Yeah.
yeah. So their bigger satellites are the ones we worked on way back, you know, at that time. So suddenly, all of a sudden, all this commercial money was like this freshness for me. It was like it was a new life. It was a fresh start,
Mm.
and they were building things right
Yeah.
instead of just sort of thinking about how you're gonna make more money.
Theoretical. Oh yeah. 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 Definitely.
Yeah, we were actually building things. See, and in my
Mm.
consulting business, I kind of ended up cynical, thinking, you know, well, I'll make money and I'll go build stuff, you know, cars,
Right.
and that satisfies that. But something was really missing inside my heart, and that
Mm.
these commercial businesses, you're building a business, you're building value, you're building hardware. It was great.
Yeah.
So I got involved in a lot of them. I got involved in ICI. I got involved in New York Space Systems, Lunar Express. That was a whole other experience.
Yeah.
You know, 11 of them to be precise.
Wow.
And the Paragon was one of them. I ended up helping out. And so about 2015, it became apparent from all these other companies I'd been helping start up and design their satellites and so on. The thing I always ended up trying to fix was finding a launch for them. And here I
Mm.
am, you know, on my way back to Moscow to go look for another rocket. It seems like this
Wow.
recurring theory.
Yeah.
And so I said, hey, you know, we need to fix this and build a small rocket like Falcon 1, because you know Chris Thompson and I, who was at SpaceX early on, thought the Falcon 1 could be mass produced, and that was kind of the solution to what we knew was a growing small sat world back in
Mm.
2001. So we
That was
started Vector.
early. That was early
Yeah,
too to see that. Yeah.
yeah. So we started Vector, and I thought, I could go out and buy John Garvey's company, Garvey Spacecraft, who
Mm.
John went back to the early days of SpaceX. He never joined, but he was part of that original crew that
Yeah.
worked with Elon. And he had spent the intervening years trying to advocate and build out these small vehicles, and he'd made a bit of progress. And so we made a deal. I started a company. We made a deal, bought his company, brought him in as a co-founder, and went to town, raised money, and that went on until 2019, until it didn't, and we can come back to that in a while. And then once I left Vector, I could see it was going to go bankrupt, and so I started Phantom because I knew that the need would still be here. And as I looked around, nobody was really addressing what I thought the mission really needed to be, which is to make space access often and ubiquitous. And SpaceX has done a lot for space access. Trust me.
Yeah.
I'm not underestimating it at all, but they didn't complete the sequence of things. And to have what I think a healthy space commerce is going to be, we have to have daily access to space. And so that's what we're really trying to do at Phantom, is to complete that cycle. So it's unfinished business from Falcon 1, really.
I love the thesis. It makes a lot more sense as we look back at your timeline here. What your approach has been now with the other approaches of trying to make this happen. What is it about Phantom that is doing it differently to, as you guys call it, becoming like the Henry Ford of space?
Right.
What is it that Phantom's doing that's gonna achieve it this time?
Yeah. So, in August of 2019, when I left Vector, I spent about 2 weeks sitting in the swimming pool, nursing my wounds.
Mm-hmm.
And then my colleague, Mike D'Angelo, I knew him from Moonex, and he was also my COO at Vector, had left. And he kept calling me, saying, let's do something, And so as we thought about it, we really said, well, we got to start with a clean sheet, right? We have to start with a clean sheet technically. We have to start with a clean sheet on the business case. And so we, we had the benefit of COVID, which was on its way. We started in October of 19, and I started to ramp up, and then COVID hit, and we laid everybody off. But that gave us an introspective period where we started to think about how you really make money in this business, first and foremost, how you have an impact on the commerce, and technically how you would do it. So if you go back to the original thesis of SpaceX, and Elon and I fought about this a lot, he wanted to build everything, right? In fact, he was so vertically integrated technically. At one point, he asked me he was interested in the scanning of aluminum alloy, which is a really strong, unusual alloy that's used in baseball bats. And the Reynolds, I think Reynolds Aluminum is the only ones that build that makes this alloy. So he wanted me to go out and find a scandium deposit and start a mine.
Oh, wow.
That was one of my tasks on my list, and that's how vertically integrated Elon is.
That's pretty crazy.
Right. So but everything he wanted to do was vertically integrated, and the only I just wasn't of that mindset, right? And it took me a long time to kind of understand where he's coming from. And in retrospect, I think he was absolutely correct for the time. Two things. One, if you buy piece parts from the military industrial complexes that existed then, you lock yourself into their pricing. And his point, and I think he's absolutely right, was you couldn't reduce the cost substantially and be beholden to those supplier networks, because they were built upon really looking like their customer, which was the US government. And one of the things you learn if you've been in this business long enough, it's kind of like old people that have been married many years. They start to look like each other and talk like each other. And same is true of clients and suppliers, right? So Lockheed Martin starts to look like the government and sound like the government and act like the government, Boeing, because they're like a married couple. And so Elon was quite right about all of that. And the second thing was, and I didn't really appreciate this till later, was that and he never voiced this, but I see this now, is if you do buy into that supplier network, there are always people that can come back and nail you to the wall and manipulate you and retaliate against you when you start to become a competitor to them. So he created an ecosystem completely outside of this, it's kind of like what he's doing now with Twitter. You know,
Mm,
he's openly declared war on a certain part of society, a philosophically
mm,
oriented part of society, and he feels like he's outside of their ability to hurt him, right? And
mm,
so that's exactly what he was doing here. And so we looked at all of that and said, well, we don't think any of that's really true anymore to a large extent. If you look at all the money that's gone in to the industry, there's a tremendous amount of supplier network that's occurred that you can use to your benefit. So
mm,
the biggest thing for us was engines, and I knew from my Vector experience, our engines what were the real problem. They were lagging
mm.
behind on schedule, and
Oh, the
the longer the
development.
engineers worked.
Yeah, the
Oh
development
yeah,
to get the engine out and working where you needed it to be. Yeah.
expensive, and it's also time consuming. And the more the engineers worked on it, the more time they thought they needed for it. And
Classic. Yep.
it was hard for me to argue with them because I wasn't in there with them, you know. And
Right.
that's, by the way, that's a strength of Elon's management technique, is he's on the inside of every one of those things. I think
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons he's been successful. So
Talk about
so
vertically integrating everything. Yeah.
to do that, he had to become part of every decision.
Yeah.
You know, people tell me about how small in the decisions he gets, like that, you know, the second flight of the Falcon 1, he made a decision that I forget what it was. It was a very small decision. He overrode all his engineers and it caused the failure of the, oh
Mm,
yeah, it's the slosh baffles. He said we didn't think he needed the slosh baffles. He didn't want to pay for them in the tanks,
mm.
and the thing suffered from slosh, and it spiraled out of control.
This is the
So he
one
admitted,
that exploded mid flight, I think it was.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. so
That's a
so
lesson to
anyway,
learn. Yeah.
that's a lesson learned. So you know, for us, the biggest risk has always been engines. And if you
Mm,
look historically at a lot of other rocket companies, engine development is the most expensive and risky part of it.
sure.
So I'd been talking to Ursa Major, you know, prior at Vector, sort of quietly, but
Mm,
you know, Mike and I went up and made a visit with them and really liked what we saw. I mean, the first Ursa Major engine I saw reminded me of a Ferrari V12. And
mm.
I just said, these guys, if they make something that beautiful, it has to run great. It's kind of
Mm.
like an airplane. If it's beautiful, it'll fly. If it's
Right,
ugly, it
right.
won't fly, you know. And that's how I feel about machinery, about engines, you know. And
Yeah.
so we you know, we bet our future on them,
Mm,
and I think we bet well. And so we went around, you know, the rest of the rocket. We're like, well, what can we buy? And there's a whole plethora of electronics and so on you can buy. We licensed the avionics from NASA. We licensed
nice.
the software for $25,000, and it worked. The stuff works, right?
Great.
So we cut years and tens of millions of dollars off our development costs.
Mm,
So we became capital efficient. So one of the things that made us different in the beginning was, you know, given a start in you know, 2019, we thought that Silicon Valley was fished out as far as rocket companies go,
mm.
and new money. So I said, look, we're gonna have a hard time raising money, so we need to keep the costs way down as much as we can.
Mm.
And so that was part of our basic planning, and that was part of our motivation to go to supply chain. And boy, were we ever right. You know, I mean, you look at what's going on right now.
Yeah.
You know, you've got companies that are spending $40 and $50 million a month and having flight failures. And you
Yeah.
know, we're spending, you know, a 50th of that
Wow.
uh, and getting by, right? So because we
Yeah.
don't have 150 guys to support. You know, we're 35 people,
Wow.
and they're all high performance, you know, like-minded individuals. We
Nice.
think of ourselves as sort of a, you know, like a special operations team. You know, that's kind of
I
the
like that.
mentality of
Yeah.
how we operate. Yeah. So there's that, and then the second thing is just getting the size right, and that
Mm,
was the other lesson from Vector was, you know, the size was too small. I think Astra suffered from this a little bit, and I, you know, I think that they made all the right decisions at the time, just like we did with Vector. But as time went on, we started to see the average mass demand grow, and the market
mm.
was wanting something in the 400 and 500 kilogram range. So rather than just say, well, that's the right number, I spent a great deal of time going through market data and projections of markets, and you know, likelihood of being able to pair satellites together and where they would fly to. and I created a curve that showed the profitability of a launch company based on mass production. As it got bigger, you could produce less of them, and you had less learning curve savings. And there was this massive peak of profitability at around 450 kilograms. So I said, that's the one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's sort of the first part of why we're different. And so we started off just making rockets, but we realized suddenly, as we looked at SpaceX, and we began to think to ourselves, what would SpaceX look like if it started 20 years later and it didn't have Elon's desire to go to Mars? And because that's always been the number one reason for SpaceX.
Your first conversation at the Mars Society with him, that whole mission you guys went to get the rockets for was to go to Mars. Yeah,
exactly. So and people ask, what's the future of SpaceX in this business? Well, all the resources are going to go to Starlink and then Mars, and that's it. Because Starlink pays for Mars. If you look at the valuation of SpaceX, about 25 billion of that is due to the rocket, and the rest 100 billion Starlink. That's a very valuable piece of real estate.
Definitely.
So we said, look, sort of ripping off that model, he's used launch as a strategic advantage. So he's been able to control the deployment of his constellation by owning his own launch. He does it at his own cost, his own priorities, own schedule internally. And it's like a separate assembly lines going on. Starlink gets priority over everything. So we said, look, the way to make more money in this business is to solve the problems, to create applications in space. And so we stretched our business model to go all the way from rockets to space applications that include satellite manufacturing. It just so happens our first year in business, I had a friend who just left the Pentagon who was building a constellation of radar imaging satellites that gave us a contract for our first satellite. So we ended up becoming cash flow positive our first year out and building a satellite. Yeah. So we're already in the satellite business. And so we have a couple of constellations that we have deals with where we build the satellite, design, build it, fly it on our launch vehicle. And we do, a little bit of upfront financing for them by doing things at our cost, passing that along. We get rev share on the back end. So that's been a very popular part of the business model. And really what we're after is to try and create value through applications and, using our launch vehicle, because everybody has to launch as really the strategic asset that allows us to do things other people can't.
That's great. I mean, the game is really in space apps, the next level. I see Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin are, their whole orbital reef platform is based around that whole idea of space apps, just a place to do space apps. And the satellite side of things, I did my my research in school on Cube satellites. So we designed a mission for taking solar weather readings, and even just that alone. I mean, Cubesats open up space applications to a whole slew of things. Are you guys small microsat to full sats, or are you guys limiting yourselves in that, or is it pretty open-ended?
Well, it's probably limited to mainly what we can launch, although we have an exception. We have a contract with something I'm not at liberty to say the name of, but it'll get announced a little bit later this year. It's a multi-billion-dollar private space science mission. We can't launch it. It's too big. But apart from that, we tend to stay under 500 kilograms. So like our radar satellites were ESPA class. The one we're still actually on contract building those. And they're, about 250 kilos, and then all the way down to Cubesats. Yeah. So, when it gets to Cubesats, we tend to rely on the supply chain for that. But as you get to the bigger stuff, like our Ingenue contract for IoT, we use our avionics off of our launch vehicle because it also works in space just fine. We use that as the core of our 24U satellites.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You guys have really accelerated. It seems from my experience. Again, I'm rather young, 32, and I haven't worked in too many of the aerospace, but I work in tech and additive, and there's actually a lot of folks from the satellite industry that have moved into the tech space because in their mindset, satellite industry moved too slow. Like they
Yeah, it's
would work
slow.
there 4 years and you never even saw anything launch. So it's you guys seem to be jumping that, and it's just that it seems like a great time to do that. A lot of the old stuff that the industry is plagued with things taking too long, and then they cost too much, and then the funding gets cut. I mean, that's kind of
Well,
been NASA's story for the last decade.
that's always due to launch, though. If
Mm,
you trace it back, so if launch is scarce, in other words, if there's not more launch slots available than there are things to launch, then that's scarcity, and
mm,
so it gets rationed. So the price goes up, and when you have the price of your launch go up, the price of satellites go up because nobody's going to launch a $10 satellite on a $1 million launch slot. They
right.
just don't.
Yeah.
And so if you can break that paradigm, this is the core idea behind what I'm trying to solve. If you can break that paradigm so that there's a surplus of launch capability and you can build your stuff quickly, fail quickly, and
Mm,
cheaply, there will be much more innovation. And it'll draw in more innovative people, and it'll draw in more innovative ideas in space applications.
mm.
Until you do that, we're stuck in this sort of pseudo government slow mode,
Sure.
unfortunately.
Yep. No, as a yeah, someone who graduated in 20, let's just say 2012, the industry had dried up after Space Shuttle already at that point.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah, and Shuttle was another example of just, us losing our launch capability, right? We lost our launch for humans, and I think SpaceX has gobbled that up. They've
fortunately.
definitely, yep, they've definitely taken that, and that's going to be a lot of work for SpaceX, that human side of things.
I think it's going to be that, and launching Starlink, and then
Hmm.
sending people to Mars and the Moon with their spaceship.
Yeah.
I don't think they'll be focused on commercial launch at all in the future. There's no need to.
Yeah. No, and there definitely seems to be a large amount of people, Phantom included, that are looking to take up that, that portion of it. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like in the end of the shuttle era, there was this promise, let's say 2000s, there was this promise that, space app, space business price was going down. We were going to be able to launch more. And then the whole industry got sideswiped with the shuttle getting retired.
Yeah.
Would you say that's accurate?
I'd say it actually started long before the
Mm.
time that you're pointing out. I mean, the promise of the shuttle, I remember the beginning of my career was, oh yeah, you can just put stuff in the bay of the shuttle and they'll launch it for $5,000 a pound.
Oh,
And that
wow.
was, oh yeah, I dug up some references. I got a white paper I wrote on this. It was down around $226 a pound was one reference.
Wow.
So that's how pie in the sky NASA was about it.
That's a promise. Yeah.
Right. And so, Gil Moore, who passed away recently, started the Getaway Special canister, which became sort of the predecessor to the CubeSat, frankly. In fact, one of his guys, Bob Twiggs, worked with Gil in the early days. Bob was really the inventor of the CubeSat,
Wow.
but it started with Getaway Special, and those guys, would have a canister that if hell broke loose inside and everything caught fire, wouldn't matter to the shuttle. It was just contained in a canister. And so students were free to do what they wanted to do, but that was supposed to be a commercial kind of capability as well. And NASA just couldn't get out of its own way. I mean, it's sort of its own safety preoccupations, which are arguably deserved. Just couldn't get out of the way of the commercial necessities.
Mm.
So you really, the first thing you had to do was to break apart human space flight and sort of this, wild Western
Yeah.
style commerce, which is
Yeah.
what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And I'm much more a fan of the Wild West, so the human space flight stuff never attracted me, like you say. And then by the time the
Mm.
shuttle retired, that was one tired piece of hardware,
Yeah.
and I don't think any of us saw that coming. And had I seen that coming at SpaceX, I might have stayed around longer. But I'll argue today still that SpaceX wouldn't exist if it were not for the shuttle retiring when it did,
Mm.
because SpaceX got $1 billion worth of capital injection,
Mm.
and they built with that $1 billion. They built the Falcon 9 and the Dragon,
Yeah.
and I can't think of a more efficient use of public money.
Thank you.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's true.
I'm just thrilled. Right? And the NASA antibodies that came out after that were surprising to me, frankly, very surprising.
Yeah.
And they've been wrong. They've been wrong at every turn, right? And people don't remember, or they don't know that when Elon first started this whole endeavor, that he was considered a charlatan and a liar and all sorts. I was told a lot of things when I was taking around introducing to people. I take him to places and people would say, "Why are you bringing this son of a bitch around here? He's obviously a lunatic and he makes you look bad." And I took him to the Pentagon and I had military guys say, "Yeah, don't be doing this no more."
Wow. Wow.
And once he was successful, suddenly
Yeah,
everybody's on his bandwagon.
Oh, especially with Starlink and what's been going on in Ukraine. I mean, the
Exactly.
military apps are a lot. I think it's only the beginning of the understanding of that. But
so this is my frustration that I referred to, when I was talking about the universities, was I had this gut sense you could do it better, right? But I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And that's still how I feel about the space industry. It's exactly that same feeling, but I feel it today. And, Elon it felt that same thing. I mean, we had endless conversations about how inefficient the whole space business is and aerospace in general and the quality of the people. And he just had this sense it could be done better. He knew it could be done better. And he did it better, right? And it's been the thing that saved us from the Russian temper tantrum that they had. Can you imagine?
And to think like what would have happened if had that not happened, where we would be today. I mean, that would have been the death blow to the space industry, I think, if we didn't have anything.
We'd be watching that big rocket go out to the pad and back, and we got another valve leak, and before long we'd have "Made in Alabama" up and down the rocket, and then people signing it, and Coca-Cola advertisements on it, and barbecue signs this way, and the damn thing would never launch.
Yeah. We have to talk about what funds this podcast, the fuel, the source behind what brings this podcast out to you every single week, and that is our 3D printing lab, AG3D. And AG3D is here to help bring not only our own ideas into reality, which is literally what it's doing with this podcast, putting it on its shoulders, putting the team on its back, but it also allows us to make a lot of fun stuff for the podcast. Like, for instance, right here is our James Webb Space Telescope coaster. We designed this, we 3D print this, and we actually 3D print these on demand in our Etsy shop at ag3dprinting.etsy.com. That's the best way that you can help support this podcast if you want to. And the cool thing is you also get something cool in return. So we're literally making our own merch, and it's something cool that you can have and use around the house. And if you have any ideas of what you'd like us to 3D print, obviously reach out to us. You can do that. Follow us on AG3D Printing at Instagram. It's probably the best place. And then, of course, we also offer 3D printing services. We are a shop that's open. So if you do need 3D printing, if you want something 3D printed, let's say you're a student in college, you've got a project. I guess it's the end of the year now, so maybe not. But let's just say you are a student and your lab is busy and it's crazy project time, and you want to 3D print something, but everything's busy or all the printers are down. We're here for you. If you're someone, you've got an idea, like our friends at Snapcaller, we help them design some of the first prototypes so that they could see, we have this idea of a business we want to do, of a problem we want to solve. Let's make a prototype and then go the next step with it. They did that with us. We helped them design, and eventually they iterated to the point where they were able to win some competitions, get some money, some funding for those early days, and now they had a successful campaign. They raised a bunch of money, and now they are a business. They're growing, and it's so cool to see the final product out there and actually helping people, and it's doing such a great job. We help people with that, but also just like if you want to 3D print anything, man, like we are here. Our Instagram page is a place you can go to see what's possible. I seemingly can't help myself but 3D print things all the time. So all the 3D printer did was make all the things that I wanted to make up here actually possible. I've been doing this for a really long time, so I think a lot of people with 3D printing get a little scared because it's really intimidating, but we're here to help bring your ideas into reality and help you achieve the thing. Literally make it so that whatever you're writing on paper, on a napkin, that something, whatever it might be, we're here to let you know how we can do it, and if not, we'll point you in the right direction of the right way to go. So if you're interested, reach out to us at ag3d-printing.com. You can get a free quote for your next project. And then, of course, You support the podcast at any time by going to our Etsy store, ag3dprinting.etsy.com, and picking up any of the cool stuff that we have here, like the James Webb Space Telescope coaster. We also have our rocket ship phone stand, which is great for any office space. I literally have one at every desk that I have at home, at work. Super, super helpful. And that's what we're about. So AG3D printing, bringing ideas into reality, and bringing the show to all the masses. So I only know about the story. I obviously wasn't there, but you actually were there on that famous day in Russia. It might have been multiple days, but if I'm not mistaken, you guys were going there to pick up rockets to send an observatory to Mars to grow plants. It was a lander. Mm-hmm. And in that meeting, do you mind going through the story?
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, please.
So yeah, we visited two places. And it was, I think, our third visit to Moscow. And Mike Griffin was with us. He doesn't like me saying so, but Mike's an old friend. And there's no conflict of interest with what he did with SpaceX later. I mean, it was all clean, but Mike just doesn't want, to be smeared by history. But he was there, and Elon and I, and we had, made a couple of reconnaissance visits prior to this and visited some of these guys. And so our last visit was to go make a deal, right? And Elon said, okay, we had looked at this lander design, and it was a plant growth chamber that we were going to grow basically weeds on Mars with the carbon dioxide from Mars inside this glass chamber, and that it would spawn the idea of terraforming. So Elon, it's important to understand, thought in the early days that we had to do things to advocate the idea of going to Mars to humanity, to people, particularly Americans, that they wouldn't buy into it. He had no idea. Everybody was pre-sold on this, right?
Yeah.
So he thought that he had to sell them on this, and that was his idea with Mars Oasis. And so he's always had the idea about bases on Mars. Always, always, always. He used to carry around on some of these trips. He'd show me these Mars-based plans that he had people drawing, just sort of sketches. And at one point I said, Elon, put that son of a bitchin' thing away, because you're crazy enough telling people we're going to do what we're going to do, but now you're talking about Mars bases. That's kind of like talking about aliens that came and visited you. And he's like, really? I'm like, don't do that. Our life is hard enough, right? So you got to imagine, here I am with this 20-something guy. He doesn't dress well, and neither do I, but I dressed better back then. The Russians are very old school, and they they like ties, and it's a sign of respect and so forth. Sure. And here he's dressed like you and me, right?
Yeah.
And he's over in Russia trying to buy a deal. So we go first to Machinastroye, and they build, I think it was the SS-18, which they had a version called Strela, which was a launcher, and we'd done our homework that we looked at this lander, and we could launch it either on a Strela out of Russia or a SS-19, which was the Nepper. And so we went to this Machinastroye first, and it was November, as I recall, and it's always snowing in Russia. I mean, it could be June, it's snowing in Russia. Wow. That's at least my recollection, right? And so we show up at this big, huge walled factory, and concrete walls, 20, 30 feet tall, with razor wire across the top. Looks like a prison. You get to these huge, iron gates, and we always had a driver, and they had a guard shack, and the guard calls in, so we get let in, and then we step into the courtyard. Then we have to wait for him to open the front door. It's not like there's a receptionist and a nice warm reception area, anything like that. You've got some more prison doors and these big steel doors. And so we ring the doorbell, and we wait, we kick the snow around, and we talk. And finally, you hear all the locks, and the door opens, and this guy guides us in, and we go down this long hallway. It's really wide, and it was just as cold in the hallway as it was outside. No heat. And Elon's looking around, and some of the doors are covered with vinyl and padding, right? And he says, "Is this an insane asylum?" And I said, "No, those are important people. That's how you can tell, their doors are padded." And why, I don't know, but that's the way it was. And so we got down to the main sort of conference room, and it was this large room with sort of these drapes, these semi-transparent drapes that had this sort of faint light coming through, this faint winter light coming through, and it was just very well lit, but it was just this odd kind of diffuse light, and this long center table, and all these Russians, they're all dour faced and skinny, and looking at this food, waiting to chomp on it, and we come in, and we're overweight, well-fed Americans, and say hi, shake hands, and of course we have to endure toasts first. So in case you've never done business in Europe, you don't just walk in and do business, right? You start with the socialization, and you get to know each other, and you talk about your families and find out about the other person. Maybe you break bread and have lunch or whatever. Then the last 10 minutes of your visit, you do business, right? That's the serious part. America is just the opposite, right? So we consider the Europeans rude as hell when they do that, and they consider us rude as hell when we do our part. So here we are, we're like chomping at the bit. We want to get this done, right? Are you going to sell it to us or not, right? And so we go through all these toasts and the vodka and all this shit, and eating and so on, and there's a chief designer there. So like startup CEOs are probably the closest thing to what they have in the Soviet Union, a chief designer. And it's sort of this technical expert that leads the organization, and really a startup CEO, but they're chosen because of their political reliability plus their technical blah blah. So the chief designer's there, and after we get done with this, most people clear out, and we had an audience with just the chief designer and the interpreter, a couple other people who were standing back, and so Elon starts to explain this whole thing about multiplanetary species and humanity, and we have a backup plan and all this stuff. And I'm watching this guy, and they don't know I understand Russian, but I'm watching this guy, and he's just getting aggravated, and you could just tell. And his interpreter was interpreting to him sort of loosely. It wasn't quite correct. And so at any rate, they got to the part about buying rockets, and the guy turns, and he spit on Elon's shoes, and they spit on mine, just like that, just kind of. They didn't put a big chunk on us, but just a little bit
still.
And Elon turns to me, he says, I think he spit on us. And I said, yeah, it's a sign of disrespect. And he goes, oh. He goes, well, I think this meeting's over with, and I heard Mike Griffin in the back. He goes, well, thank God for that. I mean, Mike was raised by an Army colonel, so he's pretty direct. And so we left the meeting, and at this point, when things were breaking up, the chief designer starts into this. He gets really angry, and then when he was talking to us, he was spitting at us while he was talking too. Wow. Just because it was just coming out of his mouth. Yeah. It was kind of gross, but at any rate, the interpreter wasn't interpreting it, and he basically was saying, this is a machine of war. It's not a toy for a rich kid. You take your internet bullshit money and go home, and we're here for serious people only. And so I'm not interpreting this, but I'm listening to it as we're putting our coats on and stuff, getting ready. He's just like chasing us out like a pissed off mother-in-law. And so we leave, and the next day we went to not Machine Destroy, but for the Nepper, so Cosmotros, and they were in downtown. It was in a nice little house that they'd stolen from somebody prior to the revolution, I'm sure, and nice yellow place, kind of nice, bright, and so forth. Quite different because they had done business with Thiokol, which was the guys used to make the shuttle boosters. On some demilling projects, to instead of dumping their propellants in the ground, the U.S. paid to turn it into fertilizer. And so these guys were a little more sophisticated, right?
Yeah.
And so we sat down. They gave us some coffee. It was morning time, and they jumped right into the business. Right? It wasn't all this slow, irritating nonsense. And so there was three of them, and three of us, and Elon just right. He says, we want to buy 2 of your rockets. He said, I've got $8 million, and they said no. We're not interested in selling you 2 for $8 million. We'll sell you 1 for $8 million. We knew the University of Surrey had been buying them for 2, so we thought we'd give them a pretty good price.
Yeah.
But they amongst themselves were talking, and they were calling him a little boy, right? And I'm like, this is not going
not
well.
going well, yeah.
Yeah. So I, and then finally, Elon said, "Well, I guess we're done," and so we had a plane to catch. It was Delta Flight 31 back to New York, and as we got to the airport, we were quiet. I remember walking out there and thinking, this was a gigantic waste of time. And it's kind of depressing because we're not going to build anything, right? And I'm thinking, here we go. There's another year of my life, getting to this point. And we're sort of sitting on the plane, and Mike and I are sitting next to each other. It wasn't very full. Elon was maybe 2 rows up from us, and he's on his computer. When the flight takes off, you feel like you're on sovereign territory again. You feel safe, and so we ordered whiskey, Mike and I, and we're drinking whiskey and starting to feel it, and it's good. And Elon's working away. He drinks Coke. He's a teetotaler. He doesn't drink much. Yeah. And so at any rate, Mike says to me, he goes, "What the fuck do you think that idiot savant's doing?" I said, "So I don't know, Plan 9 to save humanity. He's probably going to work on that next." And Elon turns around and goes, "No, I think we can build a rocket ourselves." And Mike looks at me, and I looked at him, and Mike says, "Oh, Elon, nobody's ever done that. That's an original thought." He says, "There's only like a whole graveyard of dead bodies out in front of you. You got to walk over to get there, right?"
Yeah.
And he goes, "No," he says, "we got a spreadsheet." I got a spreadsheet myself. Mike, nobody's ever done the spreadsheet before. Why did I think of that? And so he says, "Oh, screw you too." And he hands the computer back. And sure enough, he had this great spreadsheet, and he was working on it, and so we started looking at it. We're like, "Oh well, so this structure's a little light," but it was good. We were like, "Where'd you get this? Did you do this yourself?" He's like, "No, I had some help." So Chris Thompson and Tom Mueller and these guys had been working with him, and that they had helped on the lander, but I didn't realize they were working on this rocket on the side. So it was the Falcon rocket. And so he says, "We're going to start a little company when we get home," and that's how SpaceX started.
Wow.
Right.
That is the story, man. That's crazy. So this is kind of a good segue. So you have, especially in business, especially in the space industry, you've experienced a lot of these moments where you could almost say that's the end. That's the moment. Walk through what happened with Vector, in the vein of, right now the economy's tanking. Undoubtedly, there's going to be some businesses that are going to go under. There's leaders right now trying to balance that type of decision. How do you approach something like that? And even with your team right now with Phantom, I mean, you guys have done strategically really well. You guys have had some good business in this time when you need the money. What was it about Vector that you learned or that you took away, or even how you approached that situation to try and ride out the ship and make it work?
Yeah. I mean, I obviously can't comment on a lot of the stuff that happened because it's still under litigation. But what I learned from Vector was really 3 big lessons. I think the first is that the people that you work around are one of the most important things you can have. So your team and the individuals are extremely important. One thing I learned from the Navy SEALs, so I've worked around a lot of those guys in my career, is they have a way they pick their people. They grade people on a performance and trustworthy curve, and they will pick somebody that's lower performance and higher trustworthy than somebody that's high performance, low trustworthiness, right? And so that's the kind of dynamic you're talking about. That it's brothers in arms that you can trust your life to, but they have to be good. They have to be the best.
Yeah.
And so to skip that part and to not continue to treat that all the way through the process is extraordinarily detrimental, right? And if you get it right, you get this magic that happens. And so at Vector, I didn't choose well. And so when we did Phantom, I've been very careful since the beginning of using certain filters for bringing people in. And so far, we've only had to get rid of a couple of people. But we're quick about it. We don't let the poison develop. Second thing I learned was sort of the time nature of money. And I knew this, but you learn it only in the way you really learn painful lessons, right? And so you never do anything with the money that you have in hand that doesn't either put forward your next, progress towards your next round raise, or mitigates any schedule slip on your minimum viable product. In our case, our first launch. And so anything else, don't spend it, right? And so you wait to the last minute of the last day of the last year that you can possibly spend the money, and then some on anything. So like, we built out the factory at Vector probably much sooner than it needed to be. We could have saved that money, used it to bridge the gap that we found ourselves in when Sequoia pulled out, had we not done that. But, even our investors were, telling us, oh, the VCs are saying you need to do this, but it was the wrong decision. And clearly at Phantom, if you take a tour of our factory, it's very modest. It's a 32,000 square foot industrial building. But, half of it has got the owner's personal stuff in it, because we wanted to reserve the space, but he gave us a deal on it. So, it just looks like a shithole, frankly. But
well, bare bones. You guys are doing what you need to do. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to be super, super, super cheap. Right. And it's easy to get distracted by a lot of things that seem to make sense. And you just have to use that optic. Does this advance our next money raise, or does this guard against slippage of the schedule? And if it doesn't meet those two, you don't spend it. Then sort of in the end, this other business of how do you manage people, and I've become a lot less nice, and I was way too nice in trying to be empathetic to people. And when people aren't right, you just got to rip them out and just got to get rid of it. And this is, in reality, this is somebody else's money in a lot of ways. In Phantom, I've got a lot of my own money in it, but we also have a lot of investor money as well. But all the same, it's other people's money, and the emotions you attach to somebody's being there or not has nothing to do with what the investors see as the outcome. It's all about the return on this. Doesn't mean you have to be inhumane, but what it means is you don't hurt yourself by being overly humane. And so with Phantom, we're not having trouble raising money in this environment for several reasons. One, we're very capital efficient. So we spent $20 million getting to this point, whereas Rocket Lab probably spent a little over 100 million. I know Astra spent over 100 million getting to their first launch and so forth. So we're not one of these companies where somebody looks at it and says, oh, we're gonna have to put several hundred million more into it. I noticed Mark Marcusic was removed today from Firefly, so it's probably a spend sort of thing. I think there's probably some others that this is going to happen to. When you're spending that much money, the investors get nervous and they'll take you out, right? So we've also got a unique story that I think people understand is quite different. We're thinking about this as a business rather than a technology development. It's not just the pure joy of building rockets. We think of them as strategic assets, as I mentioned, and people resonate with that. I've always, all the businesses I've run until I got into these startups, they've all been cash flow positive from day one, and that's kind of my basic instinct. And so we've done well there. So we're not really suffering yet. It could change tomorrow.
Sure, absolutely,
yeah. So I think that the other thing that's helping is aerospace is anti-cyclical in terms of the economy, and the government spending, for example, never wanes during a recession in the aerospace world. We've also got renewed interest and recognition of the U.S. has enemies in the world that mean us harm, and so there's this whole rebuilding. There's hypersonic weapons and problems there, and this whole threat to space assets. And what we're building, I think, fits nicely into that defense mechanism, which is something of a secondary objective of the company. Was I always saw that we needed this rapid reconstitution ability. And the only way really to do that, in my mind, has been to replicate what the U.S. military does with the commercial airline policy that they have during wartime. they've got the right to go out and command all the domestic airlines and say, you're going to take our troops here. And so if we have a commercial capability to fly daily to replace assets, then the military is going to be able to do it. And of course, we'll be there to help, because that's what we do to our country.
What you guys are doing is it's a big need in the industry, that's for sure. And the countries need to launch daily. I mean, it's definitely not making I guess other countries around the world very happy, but I think if space travel and access to space, lowering the barrier, as you guys have discussed, of access to space, the only way is to get that launch rate to that point.
Right.
I think the demand seems to be there. It's just it hasn't, the supply of launches hasn't been there. So you guys are just filling up what's already being asked for. Space Force is ramping up, and they are, with everything that's going on with constellations, and they're seeing the capabilities, that's only going to increase. You guys have a hot fire test. Is it this month?
So yeah, nominally it's probably the week after 4th of July. We're in the middle of stage level testing right now. Last week we had the stage erected at our factory here in Tucson. We went through all the functional testing of the stage. It went pretty well. I mean, the second stage has all the brains, if you will, of the rocket. Right. Has all the command and control, and so we're really testing the rocket on the second stage. So it's a big milestone for us. So we did that first. We had some mechanical issues that we're in the middle of repairing. So we're going to go back. We got through cryo testing. We're going to go back and finish our cryo testing. Hopefully repaired those issues. And then once that's done, we're heading out to New Mexico to do the hot fire test. And that should be a major milestone for us.
And so what's the timeline for you guys after that? You guys are able to test it on the stand. 2023 is what I think I saw for you guys trying to launch first, or at least being up and ready for customers.
Yeah. First launch is, about August of 2023. And, everything seems to be coming together for that. We've got 6 engines delivered from Ursa Major in our factory right now. Most of those are test engines for the first stage, which will get nominally done at the end of the year. That'll give us about 6 months to assemble the flight unit. And, we're in the middle of building the flight tanks right now. So we've already started a bit of that. And things are coming together pretty well. We haven't really had any hiccups yet. That's not to say we won't. So we could have, ABL blow up their stage and it set them back a ways.
Yeah.
We could be the lucky ones. I don't know. But so far so good. And we've got like a really experienced crew.
That's great.
A lot of our guys came from SpaceX and Blue Origin and Virgin and Astra, and just really experienced guys. So
it's exciting. And I could see how that would be, as an engineer trying to work at a place like that. Speed. I think there's a whole generation of people that, like yourself, where you had that feeling where people want to move fast, and we'll figure out the science, and we'll figure out the engineering problems, but let's go. Right. Let's do this.
Yeah, I mean, that's what motivates most of us. We're builders and makers, and that's one of the filters I use to get people who want to come work for us is, do you do anything at home with with hardware and so forth, or do you do you just read books? Right. Nothing wrong with people who just like to read books, right, but we're looking for people who build hardware.
Right. Yeah, that's going to be a better fit for the stressful environment that's just natural for you guys trying to go that fast. Yeah. No, that's amazing. Jim, we're at the end of our time here. Thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure.
Is there anything that you'd like to share with the folks, or people who are looking to get into STEM, maybe are out of it and looking to come back in? What's your advice for folks like that?
Yeah. Follow your passions, do what you're good at, and, do stuff that people want to buy, and you never have to worry about success. It'll happen. And if part of all that is getting the right education, so be it. And I've seen people with all levels of education get involved in this. You don't have to have college degrees necessarily.
Yeah, especially on the maker side of things, right?
Exactly.
There's plenty of makers who do not have a traditional degree and know way
Absolutely.
more about how things work.
Yeah. No, it's become a bit of a product that the people that give you the degree try to convince you have to have that degree in order to be qualified to work. So it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Mm-hmm.
still a valuable commodity, but it's not the only way to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Last question for you. Why 3D printed engines? What's the advantage there?
Yeah, so it's not obvious that 3D printing is the panacea that everybody thinks it is. We're big fans because it allows you to make complex shapes very economically and repeatedly. And so Ursa Major is doing most of that. We don't do any of that really in house, but they've done most of that and they become masters at it. And there's real art to it. So it's a nascent industry. It's one of the very early technologies that is still maturing very rapidly. And I think over time we'll see more and more, but it'll be one more tool in the toolbox, like carbon fiber structures. And we still see metallic structures out there, but yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as working with metal 3D printing on the daily here, so I can definitely say it's definitely, like you said, it takes someone who understands it. It's not something anyone's just going to be able to pick up. It's not the magic bullet, but it seems like there's having the ability to do complex shapes for a rocket engine seems like a very valuable thing, even in just like putting more stuff in smaller spaces. Seems like a big advantage.
Yeah, the biggest disadvantage is just the material properties and the uncertainty in the material properties.
Sure.
Because it's a metallurgical process and in assembling all these little powder elements into essentially a structure.
Yeah.
You have a lot of control issues on how that comes together. So I'm a little bit of an amateur metallurgist. So it's that to me that's the Achilles heel of the whole thing.
Oh, absolutely. And especially, and I don't think a lot of people know this, but the advanced materials of metals that aerospace has as a standard to be able to bring that up to that point as quickly as it needs to is just, I think it's going to be a time thing. It's going to take some time and more people looking into it.
Complex alloys. Yeah. I mean, they're hard enough to make into sheets and bars and tubes and things like that, let alone, grinding into a powder and using a laser to reassemble it. That's basically what you're doing with 3D printing.
Amazing. Jim, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate you sharing your story. Anything else that the folks should know about Phantom and what's coming up?
Just keep a watch out for us. We're gonna do this.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. Thank you everybody for joining us for another episode of Today in Space. This was People of Science with Jim Cantrell. Thank you very much. Spread love, spread science. See you next time.
Bye-bye.